What Andre just proved is that serendipity happens when you feed the right wolf. I want to talk about feeding the wrong wolf. Equal time. When someone attempts to frighten you, what do they reveal? Someone tell me. What they reveal is what they're frightened of. When someone criticizes you, when someone tears you down, what are they revealing? Their own inadequacies, their own sense of failure. I've traveled all over the world, folks. I have never seen a statue erected to a critic. Ever. There's a wonderful story about a couple. They'd been dating for years, but each had a horrible secret that they kept from the other. He had the worst smelling feet in the history of mankind. When he took his shoes and socks off, cockroaches would fall off the ceiling and pray for their last rites. She, on the other hand, had the worst breath mankind ever experienced. When she breathed, plants would wilt. Wood would rot. Single-cell organisms would recite the last prayer. It was bad. And yet, after years of dating, neither one knew about the other because they brilliantly disguised it from their partner. Now, years went by. It was clear this was going to be a permanent relationship. And on the same day, independently, each of them determined they were going to tell the other about their deep, dark secret. They got to the hotel room. He ran to the bathroom, stuck his feet in the sink, was soaping it down with everything he could possibly get his hands on. She popped breath mints, literally by the tonnage. He got to the bed. He said, "Honey, I've been keeping a deep, horrible secret from you." She stopped him. She said, "So have I. I've been keeping a horrible secret from you, and I'm going to reveal it right now." So she got in his face and went, he threw his hands up, backed up, said, "Wait, you can stop right there. I've already figured it out. You ate my socks." Don't criticize, folks. You're feeding the wrong wolf. Let me talk about someone who feeds the right wolf. Everyone remember the year 2013. Obama starting his second term. Great Recession was over, but things weren't all that great. I want to see a show of hands in 2013 in that setting. How many people heard the word Bitcoin? Handful of people, please. Now, leave your hands raised if you just raised them. How many people saw Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies becoming a $4 trillion asset class 13 years later? I didn't say billion, I said trillion. $4 trillion asset class. In 2013, raise your hand if you really understood cryptocurrencies and blockchain. Let me see how many hands are up. One, because that's the only, maybe two. That's it. You should have had the courage to raise your hand. Two people in this room, but it's the right two. Back then, MEZZACAPPA, chief engineer for the Navy, brilliant guy, absolutely brilliant guy. Discovered Bitcoin. People talked about it. They said, might be an interesting investment, but seems like digital rat poison, in the words of Charlie Munger. Chris MEZZACAPPA started to invest. Started to teach other people how to invest, how to secure, how to recover cryptocurrencies. He formed BitConsult. And he found trust family funds seeking his advice. What the hell do I do with this Ether coin? What is it going to be worth? Is Charlie Munger right? Is it just digital rat poison, or is there something of value here? And he studied it, and he was able to assist thousands in making that decision. On top of everything else, he has a hotshot uncle on Wall Street. His character thinks he can walk on water and has an ego the size of Jupiter. So let me introduce my nephew, Chris MEZZACAPPA.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Stephen, for the introduction. My name is Chris MEZZACAPPA. I'm the founder and owner of BitConsult LLC. So first of all, who am I? I'm the one with the stinky breath. Kelly's got the stinky feet. So this is me and my family. But first off, proud husband and father. Also full-time, I'm the chief engineer for guns, ammunition, packaging, handling, storage, and transportation for the U.S. Navy. So that keeps me pretty busy. As Mike alluded to before, though, it's not what I love. It's my day job. Very rewarding work, but what I really love is finance, economics. So I became a registered investment advisor, got my Series 7 and 66 through Stephen Feldstein and Associates, and I was trained by the best in value investing and cash flow analysis. But what we're here today for is Bitcoin consulting. So what I specialize in is asset recovery. One of my most interesting cases were an estate case where someone in the family died. The family knew they had Bitcoin and they had no idea how to recover it. So went through devices, tracked the blockchain, figured out how to recover some funds for the family. So that's part of the work here. Scam prevention is a huge part, especially when I first started like 7 or 8 years ago. A lot of people were investing what they thought was into Bitcoin. They were being sold something called Bitcoin packages through straight up pyramid scheme scam companies. So a lot of the early work especially was steering people in the right direction and making sure they're buying what they think they're buying. But mostly what I love doing is teaching. I give a lot of briefs to other investment advisors, family funds, and just teach them about Bitcoin, but mostly help them answer questions that their clients might be asking. I used to do a lot of mining, especially for Ethereum, and been an investor for a long time. So who I am not. I'm not a salesman. I don't get a commission for selling Bitcoin. If you meet anyone who does, be a little leery. I'm not a trader. I don't trade technicals. I don't try to time the market. And of course, I'm not a drug dealer. So especially in the first few years Bitcoin came out, oh, it's the best place to buy drugs. It's the best place to fund terrorism. It is the worst place in the world to do that stuff. Do not do it if you're thinking about it. Everything on the Bitcoin blockchain is public, can be verified by millions of people around the world. Sure, it might be pseudo-anonymous because it's a transaction from one wallet to another. Not tied to your identity there, but believe me, all the 3-letter agencies are tracking who's attached to what wallet, so do not commit crime on Bitcoin, please. So what is Bitcoin? So as I was building a new slide deck today, I figured, let me pull up my 2019 slides that I presented at the Roundtable. And I thought it might be more interesting to leave some of those slides and just update the numbers. So at 2019, what is Bitcoin? That was the $150 billion question. Now it's a $1.4 trillion question. That's just the market cap of Bitcoin today. With all assets, it's nearing 4 trillion. So Bitcoin is really just a protocol or a set of rules for sending value over a peer-to-peer network. The Bitcoin protocol is a base layer for all types of applications, and currency is just one of them. As you'll see in this presentation, there's a lot more you can do. It's actually an entirely new internet where information and value are tied together at the base layer, and that kind of changes the entire dynamics of data storage and transfer. But today we'll mostly be talking about monetary theory and Bitcoin as a currency. So Bitcoin is decentralized. No single entity controls it or issues it. Bitcoin is censorship resistant. Assets cannot be seized. Transactions cannot be invalidated or reversed by any central party. That's not the case for all cryptocurrencies. If you use something like XRP, Ripple, a lot of people got very pumped up about that, but there's still one entity that was freezing accounts, that was preventing transfers, and could actually seize assets. Really no different than traditional finance in most ways. Bitcoin is limited in supply, so there's no inflation worries. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. There's 20 million out in circulation right now, so we're almost at that end. Bitcoin allows for fast, borderless payments to anyone at any time. In 3 seconds right now, I could send however much money I want to someone on the completely opposite side of the world without anyone in the middle. And also, Bitcoin is programmable smart money. Lots of things we could do there. I'll show you in future slides. But overall, Bitcoin is a global internet currency built for the 21st century. What I found most interesting is Bitcoin is separation of money and state. And if that sounds crazy to you, if you don't think all currency should be issued by a government, I would go and read Rothbard, Hayek, and von Mises. So these are Austrian economic people who, over the last 120 years, developed an entirely new way of thinking about money. They thought banks should issue money, private organizations should issue money. And why is that? Because that would create a marketplace for money. You would have better, more sound money produced by companies who actually have skin in the game, not by politicians who are going to print money to get their numbers up or not manage their budgets correctly. So who controls your money? So again, a couple updates here. 2022, Canada invoked the Emergencies Act. Over 200 accounts were frozen without court orders for anyone who participated in the trucker protests. In 2021, JP Morgan cut off over 50 Trump accounts after January 6. In 2018, Australia actually banned cash purchases over $7,500. Luckily, we had a big win here. It was reversed in 2020. So there still is hope that the government won't have access to all of our transactions, including cash transactions. But governments do want to move more towards cashless societies. They want visibility and control over just about everything. In 2015, Greece shut down banks in a bid to prevent collapse, and deposit insurance evaporated overnight. So we're real secure here in the US, FDIC, $250K per account. Yeah, we feel good about that, right? That's how they felt in various countries around the world. That gets pulled overnight, your money's gone. In 2013, Bank of Cyprus depositors lost 47.5% of all their savings. Big offshore banking hub in Cyprus. I believe this picture's from Cyprus as well. People trying to get their money out of the bank. And in 2010, Visa stopped payments to WikiLeaks. Although I'm a government worker with a top secret clearance, I'm a big supporter of WikiLeaks and standing up for when the government has overreach. And when Visa shuts you down, or as more people are being deplatformed from YouTube, Patreon, Twitch, all of these centralized places, once they get pressure, hey, I don't need to deal with that guy. He's 0.001% of my revenue. Let's just cut him off. 1933, one of my favorites, the US government forbid ownership of gold by Executive Order 6102. At the time, they seized gold from people. They let them keep maybe 1 ounce or something. But they paid the people $20 an ounce. And guess what they revalued it at in 1934? $35 an ounce. So they took all of that at 20, kind of made up their new number for the next year, paid off all their debts at the time. I was actually worried that was going to happen with Bitcoin in the first few years. I thought they would make it completely legal in the United States. It is a competitor to the US dollar. It's a competitor to US hegemony. So I was worried. Now we have kind of have enough inroads and enough powerful players in there that it's not as big a deal. And again, it would be a voluntary kind of loss rather than a seizure. And finally, Bitcoin is censorship resistant. We're going to touch a little bit on inflation. So one very cool thing is 6-7 years ago, most normal people did not talk about inflation very much. It was not in their vernacular. Now it's kind of like in the day-to-day talk, especially since 2020. Bitcoin is scarce and cannot suffer from hyperinflation. There are 20 million in existence right now, and there will ever only be 21 million. Right now it's in the US vernacular, but a few years ago it wasn't. But if you lived in a country like Venezuela, Argentina, Zimbabwe, believe me, you would know what inflation was. This is just a chart of the loss of purchasing power in 2025 alone. Venezuela got hit the hardest. They lost 85% of their purchasing power. A lot of those citizens also do not have many options. They can't trade for US dollars sometimes. They have to go through black market rates and get ripped off at like another 50% margin. So all these countries do not want, the citizens in these countries do not want to hold their native dollars because they're losing value every year. In America, it's usually around 2 to 3% a year on average. It's kind of what the CPI says. I think the CPI is kind of a broken metric. Do you think groceries only went up 3% in the last year? I don't think so. So there's a lot of different factors there. So if you thought those numbers were bad, this is back from 2019 again, but worthless money was being left in the streets of Venezuela. The bills were no longer worth anything. So people were just leaving it in the streets. You needed to bring literal wheelbarrows of cash to the grocery store in order to buy chicken in this example. In 2008, Zimbabwe, which is one of my favorites because they print the $100 trillion bills that you can get. The inflation rate hit 79.6 billion% per month. That was 89 sextillion% annually, which I don't even know how many zeros that is, but that's pretty crazy. But the bottom line is it's affecting every country. It's finally starting to come after America, but if you live in a third world country and you live in that country, you do not want to hold the currency of your native country. In the US, $1 in 1913 is now worth less than 3 cents. There's, of course, many arguments for healthy levels of inflation. It kind of gets the money moving. You get more investments. You don't want people hoarding cash because hoarded cash does not produce new breakthroughs and new companies. But as you see, 2020 has kind of broken things again. So you could see the M1 money, which is a track of the money supply currently circulating in the US economy. You see 2020 vertical line straight up. It's been worse since then, but I don't think Fred has updated their website. This is not super relevant right now, but I found it such an interesting point in time, 2019. Governments were actively devaluing their currencies to spur investment, so quantitative easing was kind of in the everyday talk on the news. And that actually led to negative yielding government bonds, especially in Japan and Europe. In the US, they had like quasi-negative yielding, which just meant they paid less than the actual inflation rate. But the global pool of negative yielding bonds hit $15 trillion, and the yield curve in the US inverted. So where are the safe havens in an environment like that? Why would an investor buy negative yielding debt? Was a guaranteed small loss really the best option at the time? I was looking around a lot, and I did not think so. I bought some gold, I bought some Bitcoin, and most investors did as well. Investors moved to gold, and the price is now up 4 times where it was in 2019, and Bitcoin is up 20 times where it was in 2019. Since 2019, the SPY is up 2.2x, and housing is up 1.3x. So how does Bitcoin have value? Great question. Like gold or government-backed currencies, Bitcoin has value because users agree that it has value. But that is also driven by merchant adoption, so people accepting Bitcoin as payment. Most of the funds that have flown in recently are really due to the gold alternative angle. People are calling it digital gold. Also remittances, $16 billion is sent across the Bitcoin network every day. However, what most people aren't covering, what I think is the most important, if you want to write to the Bitcoin ledger, so you want to be part of the blockchain, you need to own Bitcoin to do that. The Bitcoin blockchain is the most secure database in human history. If you want to alter the Bitcoin blockchain, you need to come at it with more computing power than is currently mining it. And there's a lot of game theory involved in why you would not want to do that. It would just be a massive loss of money, even just to try to win the next block, let alone try to change previous blocks. We don't have a ton of time to get into the technicals, but touch on it a little more. So recently, people have started to agree that Bitcoin had a lot of value. So in 2019, it was sitting at around 10K. Now it's at 70, with the total market cap hitting 1.4 trillion. So how does Bitcoin have value again? So these are like the historically defined attributes of money. What makes a good money? What did humans develop over time throughout their whole history? So you need something durable. Bitcoin are entries on a digital ledger and cannot be destroyed. Currently, there's over 71,000 nodes holding the entire Bitcoin blockchain. So you want to erase the entire blockchain history, you'd have to go over it and destroy at least those 71,000 nodes, which are very decentralized, located around the world, and hundreds of millions of other copies in different forms. If you want to try to slow the Bitcoin blockchain down and stop transactions, say for the next 10 minutes, you would have to attack it with more computing power than is currently mining it. Right now, it is 200 terawatt hours of Bitcoin ASICs mining Bitcoin. So the only thing comparable is the GPUs working on AI, which is around 400 terawatt hours. So that's exploded the last few years. However, they're using GPUs, which are multi-purpose kind of computers. You need ASICs to solve the Bitcoin hash function specifically. So even if all those computers turned and tried to attack the Bitcoin network, they're 5 million times less efficient. So we're talking a huge amount more GPUs. Decades. Portability, Bitcoin can be easily sent to any recipient in the world within minutes. Divisibility, you don't have to buy or send a full Bitcoin. The smallest unit is called a Satoshi, which is 100th of a millionth Bitcoin. Fungibility, each Bitcoin is as valuable as the next. This gets a little complicated talking about NFTs because you could actually assign inscriptions to individual Satoshis and make things like images or tokens proving that you own something off-chain. Scarcity, again, there will only ever be 21 million. And programmability, Bitcoin is smart money. You could program transactions to transfer at a certain time. What I really like is something called 2 of 3 signatures. So if you and your wife own Bitcoin, before sending a transaction, you need not just your private key or her private key. You could also give one to a third party that if one of you passes, you could still send the coin. How do you buy Bitcoin? This was actually a complicated question like 10 years ago. Now you could get it anywhere. Coinbase and Gemini and Kraken are the most popular, but Robinhood, Square Cash, PayPal are the most accessible, especially for younger people. If you do buy Bitcoin, make sure your exchange is secure and compliant. So the USD that you hold there is backed by the FDIC, and Bitcoin are backed by insurance. And now the big breakthrough, 2024 Bitcoin ETFs were approved. So a lot of these issues are completely null. What's important here, can I leave my coins on an exchange? Yes, you can. Most people who first get involved in Bitcoin will buy like, 10K worth, leave it on Coinbase. However, if you leave your funds on Coinbase, that's an account tied to your name, has the same attack vectors as your Chase bank account. If you piss off the government or if you are under investigation for something, they could shut down or freeze that account. So the real beauty with Bitcoin is you can hold it privately, just like holding gold in your vault at home. And I just put an example here. It's like 5 lines of Python code to generate a Bitcoin address and a Bitcoin public key and private key. Your private key is your password that unlocks the Bitcoin. If you had that secret phrase, this is an empty wallet, but that secret phrase you write down, that's what unlocks your Bitcoin to send it. You can print it out, store it somewhere in your house, and if you lose it, you're screwed. It's gone. But that's the only way anyone could ever touch your money. They can't shut down an account. They can't put pressure politically or through an exchange. So what's cool about private keys, so they work through something called ECDSA encryption, which is elliptical curve cryptography. Great rabbit hole if you want to go down it. There's so many different rabbit holes you could go down and start researching Bitcoin. That's one of my favorites. But it would take billions and billions of years if someone had your public key, so the thing that you show to the world, your address. If someone had that public key and they saw that you had 10,000 Bitcoin and they wanted to try to steal your password, it would take billions and billions and billions of years for all of the classical computers in the world working together to try to break Bitcoin, to try to break that one single private key. So the numbers get absolutely astronomical when you start talking about cryptography. Great rabbit hole to go down. Fascinating stuff. Investment risk, Bitcoin is extremely volatile. Price swings of 20% in a single day, up to 50% sometimes. Bitcoin can theoretically go to zero. Bitcoin is not a stock or has no underlying balance sheet or cash flow. And Bitcoin is really just a bet that people demand better money. So I see that trend happening. People are saying, I don't want the government managing my money. I don't want politicians in charge of my money supply. I want something written in code that we all agree on. And Bitcoin is a bet that the internet needs something called an internet of value, which I'll touch on. I know we're short on time here, so I won't go too much into future projections. But a couple things I wanted to touch on. As a consumer currency, more and more companies are starting to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. They want to start taking it as payments for their products. They don't want to hold USD on their balance sheet, so they're starting to hold alternatives, Bitcoin, gold, other raw materials included. But as a transactional currency, there's no sensitive information in a Bitcoin transaction. So there's no storing of credit card or payment information, so you don't need to worry about your system being hacked and leaking someone's credit card data. That happens every single day with credit cards. The transaction fees are also paid by the customer rather than the vendor. So Steak and Shake was one of the big organizations to start accepting Bitcoin. They even brand the burger if you end up buying it with Bitcoin. There's also no chargebacks, which results in a big reduction of fraud. So some of the very early adoption with Bitcoin was actually with online casinos. They have a huge problem with people charging 10K on their credit card, go play blackjack, and then they call Chase and they say, I didn't make that transaction, that wasn't me. And Chase would usually pull back the money because what they were doing was actually illegal. You cannot have an international online gambling site. With Bitcoin, you have payment finality, no reversal of transactions. You could also have instant conversion to USD if your company does not want to hold Bitcoin. So one of the things I find most interesting and that I want to leave you with is many of the world's best developers are building applications on top of the Bitcoin network. Bitcoin will be used to facilitate machine-to-machine economies. There's AIs doing crazy stuff right now, and they're being programmed to go trade on certain markets. What kind of currencies do you think they're using? Do you think they're entering credit card information that needs to be KYC'd? No, they're using online wallets that can transfer money instantly and has settlement finality. So imagine a world in the future where self-driving cars are actually running the entire company by themselves. They pay their own bills without human interference. There's sensors now all over the world that do Bitcoin microtransactions when other sensors in the world need to buy data, whether it be temperature, wind speed, stuff like that. Bitcoin also allows for streaming money. Some of my friends built an app where you could have a phone call with CEOs and you pay by the second. So it's streaming money out of your wallet by the second until you stop the service. And there's tons of different smart contracts that you could have to program, hey, let me send Joe 1 Bitcoin when this event happens in the world or when a prediction market is settled. As far as fixing actual problems, another great app that came out was this app called Twetch. So Twitter has a huge bot problem. There's lots of spam. There's lots of trolls. How about, and also there was a big problem with getting creators paid. So this was a website built on Bitcoin. So you log in, you have your browser, Chrome, you open up your wallet, you link it to that Bitcoin account, and you pay to post. So instead of posting for free and being able to spam the website, you pay 2 cents to post. Why would you do this? Well, you make 5 cents a like, you make 10 cents a retweet. So it was kind of mostly a thought experiment of would people be open to this internet where you pay for content and you more easily get paid and create kind of a frictionless transfer there. The coolest thing about that was you could actually do something called a troll toll. So say someone is in your comments on Twitter constantly trolling you. You could actually say, hey, you could still reply to me, but it's going to be $5 a pop. So you could just start to imagine this new internet where you have these microtransactions that are all tied to money. One of the things I like the best is I go to read a New York Times article, I read the first 3 sentences, and all of a sudden, you can't scroll anymore. You got to sign up for another newsletter, another email, maybe enter your credit card payment, get a free trial. I had articles on my website that were paywalled. You log in, you're using a browser tied to your wallet already. You want to read this article? 1 cent. All right. So everyone's sick of giving their information and data away for free. Will people in the future be willing to maybe pay to get around that? We'll see. So just wrapping up, Bitcoin is the world's immutable ledger. Bitcoin transactions are cemented in history by Bitcoin mining. A massive amount of computing power goes into confirming transactions and preventing them from being changed. We don't have time to get into the technicals right now, but you read a couple articles that I've written and you'll be convinced. Nothing there can be changed. It's not one server that can be hacked. It's not one administrator that can delete data. Especially as we're entering into this new era of deep fakes and also removal of information from the internet. It's important to have that one centralized database that everyone could go to and know if there was a change. There's a digital entry for any change on the Bitcoin ledger. So there's a lot of expansion here, talking about the last presentation as well. But this allows for contracts, deeds of ownership, and other information to be stored directly. So you hear a lot about blockchain-based stock transfers. These won't just be entries on servers anymore. They'll actually be publicly verifiable, tied to Bitcoin transactions. And we don't have time to get into how all that works, but just fascinating stuff. So how can you leverage Bitcoin? I don't care what you walk away from today with. I didn't have too much time to really sell you on it, but do not hold cash. You need to look around and find other investments. I think the S&P is great. I mean, if we're in this era where we're printing 10% of our supply every year, at least make sure you're involved in an economy that is also profiting off that. They'll be charging 10% more, or they'll have more free money to invest. But holding cash is just going to keep getting diluted. So look to other hedges. Gold is very high right now. Bitcoin is also pretty high. But just make sure you're getting smarter about your money and where you're holding it. One cool thing is I have a bunch of Bitcoin that the government doesn't know about. So if you bought stuff early on, you could send it to your private wallet. Nobody knows where it is. They know what address it's tied to, but it's not tied to my name on Coinbase or Robinhood or anything like that. If you're an investment advisor, certainly reach out to me. I could help you speak more intelligently with your clients about Bitcoin. And I mostly give this talk to groups of investment advisors and family funds who are getting questions from their clients about Bitcoin, or they want to become a little smarter. So it's mostly teaching and usually a 2 or 3 hour presentation. Finally, I'm going to close on the change of tune in the last like 10 or 20 years. So ETFs were approved in January 2024. There's currently 1.3 million of the 20 million Bitcoin held in ETFs. And now 1.14 million are held by private companies. The majority of that is MicroStrategy, which is really just a proxy Bitcoin play. They're a company that just holds Bitcoin. And if you want exposure to Bitcoin, but you can only get it through stocks, you go to MicroStrategy. However, there's more and more companies around the world. Like I said, they don't want to hold their native currency to their country, so they're starting to hold Bitcoin instead, Tesla being one of them. Entire countries are also changing their tune. So El Salvador holds about 6,000 Bitcoin now. They're making daily buys. Bhutan is actually mining it through a state-owned mining operation. And you'll hear a lot about the US Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. So far, that has resulted in not selling the Bitcoin that they currently have, which mostly been seized, about 328,000. But there's a lot of rumors that they'll actually start to buy Bitcoin and hold it. A lot of other countries got kind of spooked by Bitcoin or saw it as a competitor to their own currencies. So Germany lost out on over $3.5 billion by selling their Bitcoin holdings as soon as they seized them. And one bullish thing in the future is the Clarity Act was passed by the House. It's hit some roadblocks, but it'll give a lot of clarity into, is Bitcoin a security? Is it property? And all of these projects launching, all of these companies launching, all of these companies getting their initial seed round through IPOs. Will they be classified as securities? Are they legal to hold, et cetera? So finally, the government is getting smart enough to start regulating and not just make things illegal. Vanguard, so after years of resisting digital assets, they reversed their stance just in December 2025. So now their clients can trade Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs. Larry Fink called Bitcoin an index of money laundering in 2017. Now it's all of a sudden a legitimate asset class. So you got clear-pilled, as we say, just learned more and more about Bitcoin and what it actually was. Kevin O'Leary called it garbage and useless for payments. Now it's over 20% of his net worth is held in Bitcoin. Ray Dalio believed it was a bubble, didn't really pay too much attention to it, now sees it as digital gold. Mark Cuban said he'd rather have bananas than Bitcoin. That's a nice one. A few years later, he started investing heavily in DeFi and NFTs, and I think a lot of shady projects too, so he's not the best guy. But Jamie Dimon, maybe one of the biggest changes recently, often touting the advantages of blockchain and not Bitcoin. Don't have time to get into that now, but he's coming around. So overall, Bitcoin is sound money built for the 21st century, and it's a complete overhaul of the world's financial system and internet. It took me 2 or 3 years to even understand the concept of non-government currency, one that's not backed by a military. But as I learned more and more, I just realized the way we're moving with technology, the way we're moving with average citizens understanding more about inflation and government control, there need to be alternatives. Bitcoin is one of them. So I encourage you all to look into it and just study money in general. It's got incredible potential, but substantial risk. And overall, Bitcoin is much more than money. Pay attention when you start to see those articles about these new products being built on blockchain and how they differ from the traditional internet. And you could kind of start to understand the value and the Cambrian explosion that is going to be happening on Bitcoin-based applications. So that's it. Thank you for your time.